Daniel Dubois has reportedly just signed a 5-year extension with promoter Frank Warren. I think this is an absolutely terrible move by Daniel Dubois. I've long said in numerous videos that I'm not in favor of fighters signing contracts this long with any promoter, because there are just so many horror stories out there. So many fighters who have become unhappy with their promoter for various different reasons, but then they're unable to leave. Maybe their promoter can't get them certain fights. Maybe they're falling out with their promoter over money, and then they're locked into these long-term contracts when they can't go anywhere, and sometimes they get deliberately shelved by their promoters. For example, Mikey Garcia had a falling out with his promoter Bob Arum, but he was locked into a long-term contract. He lost basically 2 years of his career because of that dispute with Bob Arum. Andre Ward was locked into a long-term contract with the Goosens. He lost several years of his career because of that situation going sour. Gervonta Davis, just a couple years ago, was moaning and crying out for help. Somebody get me out of this contract with Mayweather, because that situation had turned sour. Ricky Burns, as we know, was in a legal battle with his former promoter Frank Warren, because Warren says he was still under contract when Burns tried to leave. So I've never been in favor of fighters signing these really, really long-term deals, because it very often ends in disaster, usually for the fighter. I mean, Ricky Burns, there were so many fights of his that got cancelled prior to him leaving Frank Warren, if any of you remember back that far. So yeah, not in favor of any fighter doing this with any promoter. If Daniel Dubois had decided to sign a 5-year deal with Frank Warren when he first turned pro, I still wouldn't have supported that, but it wouldn't have been as bad as signing a 5-year deal now, because Daniel Dubois is about to cross over into European world level. Now is the time when he wants to keep his options open. Now is not the time when he wants one promoter to lock him down for 5 years. Terrible, terrible move, particularly given Frank Warren's track record. I mean, go and have a look at his track record if you don't know about it. Him being in legal battles with numerous fighters of his over the years. These are not opponents of his fighters who maybe, wouldn't honor their rematch clauses or anything like that. No. We're talking about Frank Warren's own fighters, him ending up in legal battles with many of them over the decades. Yeah, some of these fighters ended up bankrupt because of legal battles with Frank Warren, like Ricky Burns did. When you look at that and you combine it with the health, let's just say, of Frank Warren's company, Queensberry Promotions, who haven't turned a profit for a long time. Queensberry Promotions are losing money every year, and you just signed a 5-year deal with that company? That's a terrible move. By all means, sign again with Frank Warren. I've got no issue with Daniel Dubois signing with Frank Warren again, but not for 5 years, man. Such a bad move. Now, many people are asking me, why do I think Daniel Dubois decided to do this? Why sign a 5-year extension with Frank Warren? And even more specifically, why not sign with somebody like Eddie Hearn, for example? Well, Frank Warren has done a pretty good job with Daniel Dubois so far. So there's going to be an element of better the devil you know than the devil you don't know. If it ain't broke, don't fix it. But 5 years is still a massive commitment to stay with one promoter. Well, the structure of the deal might be such that Warren is able to offer Daniel Dubois a lot more money up front than Eddie Hearn is willing to offer. So let me explain. Frank Warren was a very, very close associate of Don King for many years. And one thing which Don King used to do is pay fighters an enormous amount up front to sign with him. And this would be like the carrot. The fighters would often take it, wouldn't read the small print. And in the small print, it would explain that this lump sum that I'm giving you up front is going to be deducted out of your subsequent purses. And on top of deducting this amount out of your subsequent purses, I'm also going to deduct the standard percentage that a promoter will get from a fighter's purse. So whether it's 15, 20%, he's going to get that, and he's going to get installments of the lump sum that he paid you up front at the start of your contract. Now that situation was okay for the fighter as long as the fighter's purses remained high, as long as they were in big fights and they were still winning. But if the fighter started losing or their market value started dropping for any other reason and their purses started going down, then a situation could arise where Don King ends up taking their entire purse every time they fight, and the fighter literally has to fight for free. because Don King is still recouping the money he initially paid out to them at the start of the contract. And in some instances, when the fighter's not earning a lot of money anymore, he ends up in debt to Don King because he can't actually generate enough money from his purses to pay back the initial lump sum that he got from King. You can get yourself in debt if you signed a wrong contract with a promoter. Never mind just not making any money. Never mind having to fight for free. You can get yourself in debt. In the music industry, for example, this is commonly known as an advance. And advances got numerous artists over the years into debt and had them operating basically as slaves for their record labels. Because if the artist is no longer hot, they're not selling as many records as they used to, they've still got to pay back that advance. So they end up going on the road and doing shows here, doing shows there, literally becoming slaves for the record label. Similar kind of thing that happens with long-term contracts in boxing, certainly has happened in the past. There can be a certain amount of stability that you can get from being in a long-term contract, but at the same time, it depends on the health of the company. If the company is not doing well, then they might not be able to get you the big fights. They might not be able to get you out as many times a year as you want to get out. Your success as a fighter might start to go down, and the situation I just described with the record companies might ensue. Now, I don't know whether Daniel Dubois has that kind of deal with Frank Warren, but given Warren's long-term association with Don King and the fact that King liked to do those types of contracts, and also the rumor, if you want to call it that Frank Warren offered Anthony Joshua an enormous amount of money up front to turn pro with him, I think it's a reasonable speculation given the decision that Daniel Dubois has decided to make. Because 5 years is a very long commitment to be with any one promoter, particularly at this stage of Dubois' career. Now, Eddie Hearn, on the other hand, doesn't seem to operate the same way that Frank Warren does by way of taking big financial risks on fighters. In the United States with DAZN, he operates a bit differently because DAZN are trying to break into a new market with boxing in the States. But in the UK, Hearn tends to be a lot more thrifty. You know, Frank Warren refers to the Hearns as accountants rather than boxing people. But the Hearns are actually quite proud of that because their companies turn a profit every year rather than a loss. At the end of the day, from a business perspective, if you pay a fighter an enormous amount, let's say a couple million up front, and that fighter turns out to be a dud, you know, let's say he turns out to be, no disrespect, another David Price, then you've just done yourself over financially, haven't you? Because your fighter over the course of the next 5 years, he might not be able to make up that money. You might not be able to recoup your initial investment. This is one of the reasons that Eddie Hearn has these fight-by-fight deals with a lot of his fighters, like Dylan White is on a fight-by-fight deal, Tony Bellew, I believe Kell Brook has also been on a fight-by-fight basis with Eddie Hearn for a while. And one of the reasons he likes to do that is because there's less financial risk, or sometimes no financial risk. Because he's not paying you X amount of millions up front and then hoping to recoup it over the course of a 5-year contract. No, he's paying you nothing or very little at the start of the contract and just working with you on a fight-by-fight basis or a show-by-show basis. And it makes it easy for him, really and truly, to shelve the fighter if the fighter's not making money for him anymore. He's not legally obligated to keep getting the fighter opportunities. You know, it's all kind of on a handshake, and if they've got a good social relationship with Hearn, he'll help him out. But he's not legally obligated to. And the fighters themselves are not legally obligated to stay with Hearn. They can go elsewhere. So there's less financial risk for the fighter and less financial risk for the promoter as well, the way that Eddie Hearn often likes to do it. Now, Hearn does do long-term contracts with some fighters. But again, I'm not in favor of fighters signing very long-term contracts, certainly not 5-year contracts, with any promoter, be it Eddie Hearn, Frank Warren, Bob Arum, anybody. I'm not in favor of it because it often ends badly and usually for the fighter. Now, in the case of the promotional company hitting financially hard times and not being able to offer the fighter sufficient opportunities to fulfill their end of the bargain, there are provisions in the fighter's contract if he's in a 5-year deal with a promoter, which allow him to get out of the contract should the company fall on hard times. However, with legal matters, it's often a very, very grey area because there are numerous fighters. Just check the news, just type in fighter, boxer legal battle with promoter, and you'll find countless articles of fighters who say that they should be able to leave their promoter because the promoter hasn't been able to fulfill their obligations contractually, but yet they get drawn out into this legal process. They lose hundreds of thousands, sometimes millions in legal fees, and they don't always win. There are lots of legal loopholes. A lot of these promoters are very, very shrewd and savvy, and they've got certain lawyers who work with them that are very shrewd and savvy specifically with regards to contracts in boxing. So it's not as straightforward as just putting provisions in there in case the company starts doing badly so you can get out of your contract. Not as easy as you think it would be. And the best way to avoid that kind of disaster is not to put yourself in that situation in the first place. So you won't have to deal with somebody trying to find legal loopholes and things getting dragged out in court and millions of dollars spent on lawyer fees, and your promoter is not really trying hard anymore to get you the biggest fights because he knows that you want to leave him, etc., etc., etc. You can avoid all that by simply not signing a long-term contract, certainly not a 5-year contract. Just ask Mikey Garcia when he was locked into that long-term contract with Top Rank, which went sour. He was out of the ring for 2 years during that legal battle. You don't want to lose 2 of your best years, which is why Mikey Garcia is now working on a very short-term contract basis with DAZN and Matchroom. That's a smart move by Mikey Garcia, because once bitten, twice shy. He's learned from his previous experiences and his previous mistakes. Let me know what you guys think in the comment section below. Do you think it's a good move by Daniel Dubois to sign a 5-year extension with Frank Warren, given the health of Frank Warren's company at the moment, given the history of legal battles with former fighters? Do you think Frank Warren has done a good job with Daniel Dubois thus far? I think he has. I mean, his last couple opponents have been poor, but we're now getting Joe Joyce, and that's a very good opponent. So I think he's done a good job. Could Eddie Hearn have done a better job for Daniel Dubois promotion-wise? Of course. Because of the fact that Eddie Hearn has got heavyweights out there who he could have put Dubois in their undercard. So he could have had Dubois fighting on Dylan White and Anthony Joshua undercards for his first, 10, 12, 15 fights, and then started giving him his own shows. And that would have got him a lot more exposure than he's got on BT so far. No question about it. If Daniel Dubois had been fighting on AJ undercards and Dylan White undercards, he would have got way more exposure. On top of that, Eddie Hearn could also have gotten him well-known opponents a lot easier than Frank Warren has been able to. But could Eddie Hearn have managed Dubois as well in terms of matching him in the right fights at the right time? That remains to be seen. Frank Warren does have a good track record of managing fighters generally. He is good at matching them in the right fights at the right time and all that kind of thing. Not like he gets it right 100% of the time. He doesn't. Sometimes he puts his fighters in there and they get washed. But generally speaking, he is good at building fighters. Old Frankie boy. So anyway, yeah, let me know what you guys think in the comment section below about this particular story. It's Hatman, I'm out. Hatman merch is now available. We got t-shirts, vests, hoodies, and more. Just click the link below. Join me on Patreon. I upload a minimum of 2 podcasts every single week, covering a wide variety of controversial topics, as well as live stream Q&A sessions. Take a look on screen right now at some of the podcasts I've produced so far. For just $3 a month, the equivalent of about £2 a month, you get access to all my new podcasts and my entire back catalogue of past podcasts, including my popular Confessions of a Nightclub Bouncer series. You can listen on your computer or on your smartphone or tablet by downloading the Patreon app from the Google Play Store or the App Store for free. The Patreon app also allows you to download each podcast in MP3. For less than the price of a cup of coffee, you get access to dozens of hours of exclusive content. It's easy to sign up, there's no contract, and you can cancel at any time. So come and join our community of free and critical thinkers by signing up with me here on Patreon today.